Bill, welcome, my friends.
Excited to be here. Or I guess excited to welcome you here.
I have had one beer in 15 years. As I told you off camera, about 6 months ago, I chugged a beer to show my girlfriend and her friends at home that I still had it. But outside of that, haven't really been a big beer guy. We're going to try now. So
Did you still have it?
I think at the end of this, we're definitely going to have to chug a beer because I know that you had it and you still have it. Let's start. Which beer is this? I want to start here.
So that's actually the first beer we ever brewed, John and I. That's called our Upside Down Golden Ale. It's a light, crisp, clean, lightly hopped ale. And the reason we brewed that as our first beer is there's so little to hide behind. It's not the maltiest beer. It's not the hoppiest beer. It's very light and delicate. You'll very often find it on like high-end restaurant menus. I think that beer's on like 20 Michelin star menus. It goes well.
It tastes like a real beer.
Pasta, fish, and really elevated cuisines. Or is like that guilt-free weeknight beer.
I like it. It's definitely different to feel like I'm drinking in the middle of the day, but I'm not.
The funny thing on that is, so say you're having like an extremely stressful day and you're at 3 a.m., the wheels are just like turning, you feel like you've got 15 unsolved problems. A beer in your hand in that moment takes your temperature down so much, even without the alcohol. There's something like in your autonomous system that's like placebo effect.
I like that. That makes sense. So let's start with a little bit of an intro and just go back to the beginning. So as late as 2024, Wall Street Journal said you guys are valued at 800 million. You guys did not confirm or deny that, but we'll just put that aside. But I want to rewind to the decision in 2015. Big decision. So you're 10 plus years, hedge fund trader, doing very well for yourself, as I can imagine. You're in your 30s, you have a wife at this point, and then you decide to go into non-alcoholic beer, which at that point was 0.3% of the overall beer market.
Yeah, rounding error to zero.
Let's just give you the floor on that. How and why did you make that decision?
Yeah, so even a little before that, in 2013, so I was turning 30, I was about to get married. And so a little before the cusp of all those decisions, I was looking at a lot of key variables in my life, like what's important to me: health, future family relationships, career, productivity, sleep, things like that. And I realized alcohol wasn't contributing to any of those factors. And here I was out at 3 or 4 work dinners a week, bachelor parties, weddings, barbecues, everything. And alcohol was pretty much an always on constant in my life. I didn't think it was having huge effects on my life negatively, but also wasn't adding anything. And I was actually training for my first ultra marathon and like kind of going through all these big life milestones. And I was like, I'm going to take 30 days off drinking and just see what that's like. And it was incredible for my productivity on all those key variables. Like I started sleeping through the night, unintentionally losing weight. I went from in my workouts from surviving to thriving and accelerating through my workouts. I was the most productive I'd ever been at work. And so no brainer not going back to drinking. But then here I was still at all those work events, social events, dinners with my wife, things with family. And alcohol is a always on part of social culture. When you are out and socializing or relaxing at home, you are drinking alcohol in society, or at least meant to be told that. And here I was, I wanted to be in all those moments, enjoy all those moments, have the culinary pairing of good non-alcoholic beverages. And that really didn't exist. And it blew my mind. And I was complaining about that to my wife and a small circle of friends for a while after I stopped drinking. And ultimately started researching that at the encouragement of my wife. So I was like doing surveys, doing research and everything.
And you tried the non-alcoholic beers on the market. You didn't like what you tasted, I assume.
I was ordering them from all over the world. I would have paid anything to get these like good non-alcoholic beer regularly delivered to my house. And I really just found out it didn't exist. And it blew my mind, that I thought I was a very typical kind of like modern adult, like relatively on the leading edge of like productivity, biohacking in a way, things like that, like constantly just self-improving. And I thought with a very high degree of confidence, there were going to be like millions of people just like me coming down the road looking for better options in the not too distant future. But at the same time, that's like a decent economic idea that I had here with like some probability of success. But here I was sitting at one of the world's biggest hedge funds in a super secure job, That's basically exactly where I wanted to be in the financial industry. I liked my job, or I was so satisfied and content with my job and its like economic role in my life. I didn't even have a LinkedIn profile. I was not accepting conversations from recruiters or anything. Like that was the firm I wanted to be at, Point 72 with Steve Cohen. But that being said, like what made me cross that bridge to consider leaving that firm to do this? I started to run surveys, as you said, and upwards of 50% of people in any given survey would respond. They would drink good tasting non-alcoholic beer if it didn't have the big stigma attached to it with some frequency. But here was this market that was 0.3% of the beer market, had not grown in decades. There was no innovation, no marketing whatsoever. And I was like, 55% of consumers want this. Nobody is addressing this whatsoever in the industry. So there's a big gulf there.
What did you actually do? That little mini case study you're talking about, did you do that online? Did you do that with friends? How did you get a big enough cohort to basically, because you're a qualitative guy, you're a numbers guy, and the numbers said, don't do this. So then what did you actually do to get that feedback?
Well, the numbers actually unequivocally said this is going to be a huge market. But there's a lot of execution risk to get there, where I had a pretty much risk-free good economic career. So like there wasn't like a motivation to quit to do something entrepreneurial. My wife really helped me. She was getting her MBA at the time at Columbia, and she really helped me get going on like the surveying, the business planning, joining guilds, things like that. And she was incredibly helpful in doing all that research. I did 2 years of research. What helped me bridge the gulf of leaving a really good economic job to start this very risky business with no momentum in the category was I actually realized that I could have a positive impact on tens of millions of people, their health, their happiness, like broadly the country in general. Like alcohol is a big problem in society and has a lot of negative externalities. I'm not saying we should ever take away alcohol. People should have choices. I just want people to actually have those choices and open the tent so that people can drink or not drink and be social and be accepted. I thought there was an enormous potential positive impact there. And once that light bulb went on, I was like, boom, I'm out the door. I'm doing this.
So there's definitely the mission motive you had here. You seem like a very analytical guy. Did you go through like a mental model or frameworks to say, hey, I'm making X amount of money, and if I go and do this, like you're going to have to significantly live below your means. Your lifestyle changed, I would imagine, correct?
Me and my wife did talk through budgets, but it was also her, like the household buy-in was so important. My wife heard the passion for the idea. She'd seen me do 2 years of business planning on it. And she basically said, I don't want to know you if you don't do this. Like, this is not something you can just leave on the shelf and we talk about for 25 years and you lead this unfulfilling life. She was like, choose this path and we can always go back to the other one if we have to. So there was big household buy-in to downgrade our lifestyle, live on different means, and really go for it.
It's so crazy, man. Behind every single one of these great entrepreneurs thus far has been a very strong, supportive woman. It's crazy to hear.
It's so underrated because like, if you imagine how difficult the founding journey is, where, you know, I'm doing the accounting till midnight on a Friday night and then up at 4 a.m. on a Saturday to go sampling, and like, just like the grinding every day around the clock is so hard for so long. If you also didn't have buy-in in your house and that support, like the times whenever I would hit the floor and be like lying there on the floor, seemingly my wife would come around the corner and be like, get up. But that's so important. Like if rather you had someone who like didn't really want you doing it, wanted you to go back to your old job, like I probably would have ultimately had to go back at one of those moments.
Yeah, I don't even think it's possible if you don't have a supportive person next to you. I've seen both sides of the coin. And on this new journey that we're doing, I have a supportive girlfriend and it makes the world a difference.
Yeah, so I think household support and co-founder support is like equally as important. I was very lucky early in the journey after quitting my old job to meet our co-founder, John. And he also has incredible household support for this journey. His family, he had a wife and a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they moved across the country from New Mexico to homebrew in an empty warehouse. So he also had amazing household support, but more importantly too, on the founder journey, like we as co-founders pair so well. Like that co-founder support and complementary nature has been so important in this journey, which I think is really important. I'm sure you've met a lot of co-founding teams over years where like four founders all kind of had the same background and same skills, and like it never works out. Like basically you have to push three of them out to like get to a sustainable spot.
Outside of you have a very calm demeanor, as does he, but I could just tell from a raw skill set perspective. Obviously, he's a brewer, he's the product guy. And to start, when it was just you two, it seems as though you were kind of all other things driving the marketing, the sales, the finance. I don't want to just gloss over how you got to John, because that's a crazy story in itself. So let's tranche this from idea until you see John.
Yep.
What happened next? When did you actually quit your job? What did that look like?
Yeah, so almost exactly 2 years into business planning. So December 2014, I was on vacation with my wife, and complaining about non-alcoholic options reached a crescendo. And that's when she was like, you should fix this. And so I started 2 years of business planning at that point. On and off, I'd go through major bursts or like valleys where I barely worked on it. And in the end of 2016, so 2 years in, I had this 96-page business plan in a pretty good place, like full economic model, real case for doing this. But at the same time, I actually told a colleague about this idea for the first time in that December, 2 years in. And I was like, but there's like a 10% chance I'll ever do anything with it. And like a week later, my wife basically had that conversation where she told me, you should I want you to walk in and quit your job. Otherwise, I don't want to be talking about this in 10 years. And so January 2017, I walked in on the first business day of the year, and my boss next to me actually was like, did anyone have any major epiphanies over vacation? Like totally joking. And I was like, actually, Jeff, can you pop in an office? I actually do have something to talk about. And so I resigned on the first business day of the year in 2017, and everyone was kind of surprised, but very supportive at the firm I was at. And I was off and running then. And I went from a seat where I had 200 brokers who were all extremely talented people who, whenever I rang the phone, they'd pick up on the first ring. And I was in like such a well-supported seat, to being totally on my own. Like nothing came into my inbox automatically. It was crickets and rejection, and I could not get anyone in the industry to talk to me. There was less than zero interest in what I was working on. And it was a very dark period, really.
What do you think are the key things that got you through that? Because I think the one thing, and I've seen both sides of the fence as well too, is the identity shift. I mean, you're working long hours, Monday to Friday, sometimes even Saturday, in a very high paying, powerful job. And then you go to this kind of lonely entrepreneur that is getting a bunch of no's and not making any money to start. What were the big things you think that got through that outside of, your wife?
Like whenever anyone comes to me and is like, do you think I should do this as an entrepreneurial venture? I love talking to founders like very early in their journey. The number one thing is like, does the fire burn so bright that you couldn't possibly put it out? And for me, that was like a clear yes. I wasn't someone who had 50 ideas and chose one. I had one idea that I cared so passionately about that I really believed I could have an impact on tens of millions of people. Like the kind of transformation I had personally undergone, I wanted to carry forward to tens of millions of people, and believed I really could. And so that helped lift up a lot of the valleys I was in. And I had really good support too. But, in that first 3 months, I went from like getting 1,000 emails a day, talking to hundreds of people a day, working on such exciting projects, and like total information overload every single day, all inbound, to sitting at a desk by myself and nothing would happen unless I made it happen. And so I'd originally wanted to travel all across the country and talk to every contract brewer out there. I didn't get any meetings. So that was like very dark. I talked to hundreds of brewers trying to find someone to team up with me on this journey who has like the technical expertise to really be a good counter to me, and got all rejections. Most of them were like less than 2-minute phone calls. So I started traveling around to conferences and trying to meet people in person, like kind of ambush them in person. And that was really striking out too. And there was a point that was so dark about 3 months in where I told my brother, I was like, I feel like I'm in an alley. There are no roads out of this alley. I think I might have made a huge mistake. And I was like, I don't even know what to work on next week. I've gotten so rejected and like every door is so closed. But there were little moments like that where my brother was like, let's just go away for the weekend. Let's go skiing. And we talked about the business nonstop for 72 hours. We went to a bunch of breweries in person, and that was very inspiring. So
I want to know, like, what was that business plan and what was your elevator pitch to people? Was it just you talking about the hole in the market for a non-alcoholic beer with operational excellence? Like what was your verbal pitch there?
Yeah. So after I came through this like very dark valley of rejection, and family and support helped pick me up off that, I was very lucky to meet John about 4 or 5 months in after I quit my job. And from there, I had someone to collaborate with, sharing ideas all day, talking about what's important in the business, everything.
How did you close John? What did that conversation look like?
So he, at that point, I'd had so much rejection that I'd taken non-alcoholic beer and everything off, everything related to my outgoing messages. It was just words like creative and innovative and things like that. So John is essentially our technical co-founder. I'm the like sales, marketing, finance type guy. And in his outreach email, he had listed all these awards, and craft beer was really competitive already at that point in 2016, 2017. There was about 7,000 breweries at the time. There's 10,000 breweries now. And there are these really highly competitive industry awards competitions where out of 7,000 brewers, everyone wants to win these awards. Like you can imagine how crowded the IPA category is, for example. Well, John in one of those years had won a silver medal in the IPA category at the Great American Beer Festival, and like a whole list of other awards, which is so prestigious and difficult to win. And he was working at a great brewery in New Mexico, but very much a tap room brew pub business. They didn't even have a canning line plugged in at the time. And so I knew I was talking to probably the most talented person I'd talked to.
And give us context. Is this a cold call, an email, LinkedIn?
Email at first. And then we arranged a phone call. And basically I started the phone call by being like, please don't hang up. If you could give me 5 to 10 minutes and not say no till Monday, like, please just think about it. And most people were hanging up within 2 minutes and I was never hearing from them again. And credit to John, we talked probably for like a half hour and exchanged ideas, shared a bit about ourselves, the vision for the company. And he was like, okay, this has been really interesting. Like, I'll think about it. And he got back to me that Sunday morning, a couple days later. Well, he said, I was originally going to say no instantly, ... I think it's genius. He's like, I totally see it. And he'd grown up in food service. His dad was kind of a pioneer in like farm to table restaurants on the Connecticut coast. And so his whole family helped in that restaurant growing up. And he was really familiar with food and the industry, and had seen the industry from the inside out and saw the potential for positive impact. And he was really drawn to the innovation challenge of it too. Like, brewing is an incredibly innovative industry where brewers are so scientific, so talented on recipes and the quality.
And at that point, there's no innovation in the space.
And to him, it struck him as soon as I said it. It was like, why hasn't anyone done this? Like, it is such a huge need. People should have options. And he envisioned a world of his kids turning 21 and looking at a menu and having just as exciting offerings in non-alcoholic as alcoholic, which is potentially a really exciting, like, anthropological moment to look back on 20 years into the future. Like, if we helped make that change.
So at that point, he's in on that Monday. And then what's next? I mean, you hardly know this guy.
Yeah, it was honestly like weeks of talking, I would say. Basically, the first window he gave, I was on a plane to New Mexico so we could meet in person and talk about it. And from there, I think we really hit it off. And we just started talking about like every random thing. You know, I was used to sending hundreds of emails a day and talking to people around the clock. And I had all this pent up energy and excitement to like start really talking about this idea with people. And finally I had a collaborator, and I think John was a little scared off the bat by like how much I emailed and communicated. But we like really hit it off. And within a few months, his family was moving across the country, and
Hey, love that.
which is pretty crazy in speed. And, we basically had this set up in an 8,000 square foot empty warehouse in Stratford, Connecticut, where we had Gatorade jugs stacked up to home brew.
I saw that picture. It's right over there with the Gatorade jugs.
Yep.
That's absolutely legendary. And did you know anything about crafting beer? Because apparently people brew as like a hobby. I didn't know that was a thing, but you're approaching him. It seems as though more about the white space and the identity and the operational excellence. He thought about product. What did you know? Like, could you even speak the language at that point?
Once you're in the presence of someone like John, you realize like just how little you know. And that carried all the way through from not only brewing to but to tasting beer and my knowledge of beer. Like being around someone like John, I realized, wow, I know nothing about actually good beer and how to taste it and things like that.
So at this point, you guys are self-funded through your funding. You bring him on. You're in this 8,000 square foot brewery. And what is it? Just you two and a desk and you're making beer?
Exactly. Yeah. Like two grown men don't know each other, just talking for 8 to 10 hours a day about life, what we're interested in, what do we want this company to be, what do we want the culture to be, what do we want the community to be. I'm over here drawing up OSHA manuals and company handbooks and things like that. And literally talking about every such thing. And we went to different places and got food certifications together. And, but we covered so much ground in the next 6 months together. Just
you're forced in a room with someone for hours on hours. You could talk about anything and everything. I'm interested in, from a process perspective, we talked off camera about my split testing when instead of tweaking one variable, I just went all in on a zillion different things and I got no kind of conclusive results. How do you, if you're hey, I want a citrus flavored beer, I'm sure that's what you told them, hey, I want this type of beer. What does that process look like?
Yeah. So I had done a decent amount of process work and education. I was I think I have a differentiated way to make non-alcoholic beer. And I basically we were working together at that point and I handed it over to him. And he was yeah, that could work. There's a lot of reasons why this wouldn't work but this part might work and be interesting to test on. But he's we're going to start way over here with the scientific method and go one variable at a time, tweak it 1 degree a day, change this, change time, temperature, pH, everything.
And then you had to let it sit on a per day perspective. So one tweak, let it sit for a day, taste it, and then tweak the next thing.
Yeah. And so even starting in the mash tun, we might be okay, we're going to start at we're going to have a 15 degree range of where we want to start that tank. And so there's 15 variables there. Got to run 15 tests, but then we're going to have all different times also and test how variables move over time. And then once we figure that out, move it to the next tank and okay, what does that look like at 7 pH? What does that look like at 4 pH?
And at that point, it's just you guys sitting in this brewery, just saying, hey, I like how this tastes better than this, and just tweaking.
Yeah. And so John might brew whatever variable we're holding constant, might brew 1 batch and then split it out into 12 different tests from there, say, where it's all, and then we'd have this cart with all these carboys. We called it the fermentation carts, but we had all these carts all over with labeled experiments going on. And any beer we were doing in any process took from 6 days to 20 days to ferment and work its way through. Or it got to the point that we wanted to test for at that point before we took it to the next step. And so it was true, down to the bolts, scientific, rebuilding of how to make non-alcoholic beer. And it was really exciting. I hadn't done anything with my high school science education.
Nor has 99% of the people in the world.
16 years at that point. And it was awesome. It was so intellectually challenging and fun. And so we were talking about that.
And it also was kind of flexing your creative brain as well too.
Well, even
you were
more
just dealing
so,
with numbers at, before that.
So my skills coming in would have been finance and maybe operations, forecasting, modeling, finance.
Sales too as well.
But yeah, not yet at that point. My finance career was I was the customer basically. So I wasn't doing any selling basically. I had in the first 6 years of my financial career been on the sell side, but so I was starting to take marketing courses. I read all the Seth Godin books, for example, and
Purple Cow,
read everything. And I found that fascinating. And I would come in and talk to John about all that stuff in marketing and different culture books. We would both read Simon Sinek books and different things and then talk about it. And so I built this employee handbook in 2017 where I was I came from a world where I think 95% of the corporations, you don't really know what's in the employee handbook. You don't know what the mission statement is. At some point in the past quarter century, McKinsey just dropped that off and you wrote a check for it. But in this, so I made an employee handbook and put decent thought into it. John and I talked about it a lot. And before I knew it, every teammate who joined us, I expected to put that handbook on a shelf and never look at it. It was companies have to have handbook, check. But then we started to bring people onto our team, and I'd be like, oh, sit over here, and like, this is our handbook, like this is our mission statement, this is our values. And before I knew it, I was doing that with every single person who joined our team. And like, it became a real like North Star document. And we still do that to this day.
Yeah, I mean, from 2020 to now, I saw that you guys went from like 20 employees to 250 plus. And when I walked in here in the morning, we've probably met 25 people. And what I said off camera right before you came on, everyone seems very, very happy in here and helping. So you've done an absolute amazing job on the culture side.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, that's as much of what they bring into our company. Like, we've always had the mindset where everyone can either walk in the door with a storm cloud over their head and like make everyone's day a little more miserable every day. It's like, oh, it's Monday. Like, I got stuck in traffic, yada, yada. Like, a day can be as bad as you make it. But like, if everyone's walking in looking to like challenge people, pick up their teammates, help them with problems, move a little faster as a herd, it can be an awesome culture too. And like, work is 35 to 50% of our waking hours and probably 70% of our emotional energy in any given weekday. Like, that's a big opportunity to make life awesome or make life brutal. And like, so we really try to emphasize those things at Athletic. And John and I put a lot of thought into that.
With that being said, it was a very bold move to go all in with John without spending all of that time first. Imagine if you were in there and you didn't like him.
It's one of those like things, the universe put the perfect person in my path. And I just feel incredibly lucky to have met John. Yeah. And like, I've had similar with a number of advisors who've turned out to be great advisors and mentors along the way. Like our one of our lead investors and board members, an incredible mentor, is a guy named Tim Barracat, who I didn't know from the financial world. We were both in similar parts of the financial world. He was obviously way out on the road ahead of me in my prior life, but he took interest and passion in Athletic and has been like the most amazing mentor in building Athletic as an angel investor. And then there have been people like Blake Mykoski, the founder of Tom's Shoes, and Darren Ravel, who's
Sports legends,
very well known in the sports world and has made a number of great intros for Athletic. But like, Blake in particular was super helpful early in days in Athletic, like giving me being generous with his time, giving some great advice.
Mission-based as well.
Yeah. And so some of the advice, so like, we were a very small company growing really fast when I met him. And he gave me some unbelievable advice about participating in the interview process, meeting every teammate, and like culture generally. And that stuff I've taken through to this day. And he was like, the second you step away from participating in that is the second the whole culture goes down the drain.
Completely agree with that.
Yeah.
How'd you meet them, if you mind me asking? Darren and Blake, those are...
Darren was speaking at a conference I was at, and I literally just walked up to the stage after and like made a joke at his expense. And I can't emphasize enough, like when I went up to tell Darren about Athletic, I was telling hundreds of people a week about Athletic, and almost all of them were like, that's a stupid idea. Don't lose track of your day job. And Darren was like, so like a healthier, and he named a very well-selling light beer. And I was like, exactly. And he was like, that's an awesome idea. Please keep me in the loop. And like, his recognition of the idea was amazing. Tim and Blake just cold emailed. So like, just
fans of the brands,
some version of info at Athletic Brewing, Bill at Athletic Brewing. And they just like tried a bunch of email addresses. And when Blake emailed and Tim, both of them, I was like, oh, I was in Connecticut. Blake was in LA. I was like, I'm going to be in LA next Wednesday. Would you like to go? Of course I wasn't going to be, but I like flew across the
old
country.
adage, I happen to be in your town on this day, or this day when I'm flying in.
And he made time for me, and it was like really impactful.
So what was that next step? So you guys finally had a finished product in this 8,000 square foot place.
Yeah.
And then you had to go raise money.
Beer started to taste good. And so John took the homebrew setup too.
Can we just stop for a second?
Yeah.
I just find it so ironic. You guys didn't even have a product yet and it didn't even taste good, but it's just the thesis of just the opening in the space.
Yeah. Two grown people who were like months invested into this, years even, had both quit their jobs. Yeah, and John has said up front, we are never launching unless it's amazing. And so the beer does start to taste really good though. Like 40 batches in, Upside Down starts to taste good. And John's like, okay, we're really onto something now. We still have a lot of work to do on process, but like we're going to get there. And so he takes the homebrew kit to his parents' garage, So like me and him are moving back even further in our careers here. So now we're homebrewing in his parents' garage, not even our own warehouse. And we're bottling beer that I can drive around Connecticut and hand sell to retailers for when we do have distribution. And then we start the construction project and like do all the concrete, build the tap room, throw in the tanks.
For context here, who else is working in or on the company? It's you, him, and because it seems as though you're the construction worker, the salesperson, the production, you're everything.
At that point, just us still. Right before we launched, we brought an incredible assistant brewer for John, a guy named Andrew, who was with us for quite a while. He went back to get further education. We still keep in touch with. And then Pete joined us on the canning line, and Pete's still with us to this day, right around his 7th anniversary now.
True testament to culture. There you go, baby.
Yeah. And so very lean team. We were basically running the whole brewing operation and packaging with 3 people, including John. And then I was the whole outside world. And that was until about 6 months after we launched. And then we grew to 6 people by the end of 2018, 25 people by the end of 2019. And then we added 100 people in 2020.
And at that point, what? Are you guys e-com? Are you in stores?
Yep. Yeah. So 2018, we were on the market for 6 months, and we launched nationally on e-commerce and in Connecticut and Massachusetts in brick and mortar distribution with great distributor partners. And then 2019, we went out to about 6 states. Most distributors at that time were still saying no to us. It was really hard to crack open doors at that point. But the data started to look really good in 2019. So in 2018, like me and John could not get anyone to talk to us, like couldn't get any meetings.
And by anyone, do you mean investors or distributors? Or anyone? Or end buyers? Anyone,
yeah.
Okay.
To even get people to like sample the beer, I had to do such gimmickry around like, it wasn't just, hey, do you want to taste this? Would you bring it in? It would be like, no.
Give me a gimmick or two. What'd you just say it was alcoholic?
I would do things like, I would walk in and be like, hey, what if I told you like your best selling beer in 10 years is not on your shelf. It's a quarter of the calories of this really great selling beer. But like when you put it on your shelf, people are going to look at my store finder and come to your store because no one else has it around. And I'd like do this big lead up and like be like, are you ready to taste it? And I'd taste it and they'd be like, wow, that is really good. And you say that's 45 calories? And like go through the whole thing and they'd be like, and it's non-alcoholic. And they'd be like, okay. Like, and
this is you hand-to-hand combat in the beginning. Like you're doing the selling, correct?
Yeah. And, or I would do things like go up to people in the parking lot and ask them to like trail me in and be like, pretend to overhear what I'm saying. And like, so there were like all sorts of gimmicks. This. And it was tough. Like so in that first 6 months after we launched, I was doing a lot of events, like, cause no one was walking to the beer shelf looking for non-alcoholic beer. I knew if we just made the beer and put it on the shelf, our company would die within 6 months. No one was walking to that part of the store looking for it. They'd given up on that 30 years ago. So what I did was I had to drive people with no marketing budget basically to that shelf. And so I'd set out every weekend. I'd do my best on social media throughout the week, but I would go to races, whether it was anything from 5Ks to Ironmans to ultra marathons, and hand out hundreds of beers and talk to people person to person.
The best of the best doing this. You probably remember some of those people's faces from this day. It's just, I remember, there's names that I remember from 2016, 2017. It's so crazy.
No, when these people, people throw around the words like community and like it's some like software plugin that can like scale community for you.
Can't.
When we talk about community, it's like people we have met in person, told about the company, like changed their lives in many ways. And like, these people who I met in person in 2018, 2019, 2020 at events and exchanged emails with over the years and stuff, like I love seeing their name pop into my inbox. But also when like we get like mildly bashed on social media, I recognize so many of the names that jump into the mud pit and do our bidding for us also. And it's like really gratifying.
I mean, it's the ultimate form of leverage too, that you're the quote unquote founder and CEO and you're in the mud. You're literally doing the guerrilla marketing on the ground floor. And you're getting good feedback too. People are probably telling you what they like, they don't like.
Yeah, it was so easy to market the product because I would have loved to be running those races anyway. And like, so I would get there early, set up, run the 5K route, run the half marathon route, run the Spartan race with the first loop going around. And then I would be like muddy and sweaty behind the booth with the same medal on that everyone else got and sharing beers, talking
Is this
about the
allowed?
beers. And
Like the race, the people running the race, the directors, like, did they allow this, or did you just?
yeah, well, a lot of the races I would just run with the sanctioned group. I'm not fast. So like, I love running. Like if you gave me 6 hours on a Saturday and my family wasn't around, I would love to go for like a 4-hour trail run. But at the same time, you're never going to find me on any podium. I'm like a 10-minute miler. I just love being out there. And so I'd have to start these half marathons like a good hour before, like when one of my favorite races is this Pain to Pain Trail Half Marathon in Westchester here every year. And I've been sampling there since 2018. And I always show up, set up my booth, and get out there at least an hour before. But like the winners are so much faster than me that they're like catching me towards the end. And like people along the aid stations are stuff. Are like, yeah. I'm like, not me. Don't worry. Yeah. But but like at the same, so going back to where I was, like hundreds, if not thousands of beers every weekend. And I'd be driving somewhere within 3 hours. Then I'd get back to Stratford, open our tap room at noon, and we'd have visitors at the tap room. And I was the bartender, at least for the first 6 months there, talking to people directly about our beers on tap. And then, but it started to happen slowly. At first, the velocity was not great at stores. No one wanted to talk to us about non-alcoholic beer in 2018. Like we could not buy a conversation. But like the most ironic thing happened as we turned the clock into 2019. You have Sober October, and like you have Joe Rogan talking about non-alcoholic beer in fall 2018 and Sober October. 2019, Dry January. You know, everyone every year previously had been like doing Dry January, where like typical like healthy reset, people give up drinking for 30 days, and like it's a good kickstart to the year. Well, previously, when it was like people search like what to drink during not Sober October, there was like nothing there, literally.
Water.
And all of a sudden, there were a few PR hits where people who searched during Dry January, like what to drink during Dry January, it was like, there is actually a great non-alcoholic craft brewery now. And by the way, you don't have to live 10 miles from it. You can order nationally online. So like for the first time ever, beer was available for purchase online nationally.
Really quick, when you guys look at your sales, are you seeing, is it every single year? Is there uniformity? Like October in January, is that a big thing? I've never been a part of this. I'm just curious.
So generally it's the biggest beer holidays for alcoholic beer are the same biggest weeks for non-alcoholic beer. So 4th of July, Memorial Day, Labor Day, like the winter holidays, all of them are huge beer holidays also, except January. January is like this, like really like the water's warm, like really low CAC introduction period for customers. And so we accumulate a ton of customers in January, but they don't go away. They're like, oh, I love this. I love how I feel. I didn't realize I could drink great beer all week, every week, and feel good the next day at work. And so we find a lot of our highest retention month of the year of customers is January.
By highest retention, you mean the stickiest LTV over time?
Yeah, like
if they come in January, those are your best customers.
They're most likely on a percentage basis to stay with us forever. Yeah. So 2018, absolute crickets, but we come around to that first Dry January and all of a sudden everyone's looking for non-alcoholic beer and finding it for the first time.
And at that point, it's complete white space. It's old archaic brands that are just throwing in their mix a non-alcoholic, but they're not really pushing brand or dollars behind it, and you guys.
Yeah, so there was it was lagers. It was a super boring category, no innovation. And all of a sudden, this category had IPAs, golden ales, stouts. John was basically launching a new beer every Monday. It was like, I would say offhand, like, John, do you think we can make like a really hoppy double IPA? Or like, it was like hot summer months. He was like, what do you think about making some like fruit stand sour beers that are like super refreshing?
So you guys were dropping product every Monday. This is like what streetwear does.
Yeah. And so I was getting our community, we had no marketing budget, but like by word of mouth, people were starting to say every Monday at 5 p.m. Athletic launches a new beer. And people were just waiting at their computers. And we would sell out of these limited releases online in like 30 seconds every Monday. And so all of a sudden we went through the winter into 2019 into the spring, and we went from like absolute crickets to like barely brewing, not that often, to we were so out of stock and out of capacity. It was laughable. Like we had this like national online community, and then our local stores couldn't buy enough. We couldn't make enough. And like we had totally outkicked this brewery that we thought was going to be good for at least 5 years.
I'm very interested because a lot of my buddies come from the finance background. And I've always been intrigued by, can they or will they make that jump into entrepreneurship? A lot of these things that you're saying, I mean, you didn't come from ecom, you spun up a website. When you were doing those races, like, were you thinking CAC to LTV ratio, or were you just thinking like, this is common sense to do this? Or was it just your only option because you had no resources?
I was thinking like 1,000 true fans. I got to be out there talking to people, make 1,000 people fall in love with what we're doing.
1,000 true fans, Kate Kelly, amazing blog post that has come up on every single podcast so far.
I love it. It's like, it is like, if you
champion can, 1-to-1
for sure. Yeah. And that's why I was like also kind of glad fundraising was so hard, because like our angel investor team ended up being almost 70 people, and I did 120 meetings, but like that group of like 70 ambassadors for our brand was so good for like a word of mouth sprint out of the gate. Yeah.
So let's talk about those. So it looks like you had 70 yeses, 52 nos. You have a great product. Now you have some momentum. What did that look like, that process?
Yeah. And it was probably way more than 50 nos. That was basically just my CRM sheet that I was like trying to track responses. But yeah, so John and I were homebrewing all day during the day, and I would go out and do fundraising meetings at night. Generally, like I'd drive somewhere within 3 hours of Connecticut and either have a dinner or like meet someone in person. Very often there were dinners of like 5 to 10 people, and I'd be so excited about it and get 5 to 10 no's or just no feedback whatsoever. And I also like, fundraising's hard and people are like funny about money, and I didn't want to like follow up with people like crazy. I really wasn't outbound on any friends or family. I'd figure they would hear about it and know about it. There's such like expectation in asking that I didn't want to make former colleagues, friends, family like uneasy. And I also, it's a big emotional burden to take capital from people you care about. It's one thing when you like don't really know a person, you care for them for sure, but like they're making eyes wide open investment totally proactively on their own, versus like a family member writing a big check that they may or may not, they probably wouldn't have made otherwise. And so I love our angel team. A lot of it is friends and family, but the burden of like being the shepherd of that capital is enormous too.
What do you think the biggest mistake people make when they're raising, specifically on the angel round?
I think it's so important to get the right investors in every stage, like goal alignment, time horizon alignment, expectations of the journey. What they're getting into is so much more important than, the valuation and stuff like that. Like at every round of our company, I don't think we've ever taken the highest term sheet, and sometimes significantly not so, to get the right investor, have the right alignment or people we really liked. I do think the biggest mistake people can make is like investor misalignment of goals, not communicating really clearly about that before getting into business together.
In what sense of the terms? Financial terms or timeline terms?
Yeah, timeline, business goals, expectations on like profitability versus revenue growth, things like that. I think people get into a lot of trouble with like preferred share structures, things like that. Also boardroom alignment. I've had a lot of friends who are founders who've gotten pushed out of their own companies for like really small plateaus in sales. Like every business is going to go through peaks and valleys, and we've been incredibly fortunate at Athletic where we've actually had all like really good board continuity. We've added board members over the years, but all of our board members from my 2019 board of advisors are still with us 5 years later, and they've come into like pretty tough. Like I know from the outside, Athletic looks very lower left to upper right, but like we've had great board meetings where we have been in like fairly difficult situations, COVID, like interest rates going vertical, all sorts of different things. And it's great to have a boardroom where you can talk through challenging things and come to great solutions and be all united.
Let's get some big call outs. So you raised 50 from General Atlantic, But then the celebrities are big too. You got Carly Kloss, Darren Ravel, David Chang, Lance Armstrong, JJ Watt, Naomi Osaki, Blake Mikowski. Everyone always says you need strategic partners, strategic investors. Why don't we call out one or two and tell us kind of like a big learning or something that you've really, really leaned on them for? General Atlantic is a big new sexy one.
Yeah, they're pretty new and they're great advisors, super patient. I would say, so a lot of companies in this economy are like somewhat shell companies in terms of like thin layers over contract manufacturing businesses or whatever. John and I made the decision that we wanted to be long-term employers and build real manufacturing. So like building real US manufacturing is a capital intensive business where we've built 3 breweries now. We're building our 4th that'll be done mid-year of 2025. We've put somewhere 125 to 150 million in hard assets in the ground, and then invested way beyond that in our people and building the category. And
I was looking at a machine out there, and Chris said that it was 275,000 pounds. I was just thinking about how much money that probably cost.
For sure. And each brewery we think is so large until we build the next one, and it's like 2.5 times the size and speed. And
I mean, this place is running 24/7 too, for context, for everybody, because you guys are maxing out capacity.
And it's really exciting because we go to our retail partners, like say a Walmart or someone like that, who's like a US company also. And they're like, you did what? Like you have a team of 300 people and you've put over 100 million into the ground in the US. And like, it gets our customer community, our retail community so excited that like we're actually investing and clearly future oriented. So, but like having an investor team who's really excited about building actual hard assets and manufacturing and doing that exponentially is really expensive too. So we've tapped into a lot of experiences there. So I referenced one of our great angel investors, but really like our whole group of angel investors has been so supportive through this journey. I thought we'd very quickly go from angel investors to institutional investors. And actually our angel investors came back 3 rounds in a row and helped us build. And we were really lucky because the speed we were able to move at a business with this like really supportive group. So shout out to all our angel investors. Then we brought in Alliance Consumer Growth, who's like a premier CPG private equity investor. And they've seen us through quite a roller coaster of like profitability and scale and everything. And so really nimble, great private equity firm.
Let's get granular there. So like what type of conversations and feedback would you get with someone there?
Yeah. So I came from finance and thought I like had all this financial and operating expertise. And I was like, oh, I don't need any financial help. But the difference between like financial statements for a publicly traded company and an operating model from a true manufacturing business with like all these arms and tentacles and everything is night and day. Like the depth of a true operating model is so deep. And shout out to Alyssa, who was their CFO at the time. I would just like kind of data dump the models and financials I was working with. And I was like, this is where I'm at. But like a partner like that helped look over my shoulder and really get complex very fast on our business. And also, it's a big thing too for a firm like that to take it in stride when our ambition grows and we're like, actually that next brewery isn't going to be 100,000 barrels. It's going to be 450,000 barrels. And we need to raise 3 times the capital we thought we did on the next round.
Wow.
But for partners to like hold hands and take that in stride is huge. And then Keurig Dr. Pepper led our next round, and huge company. I think it's like a 50 billion plus market cap. But like the people are so approachable and nimble, and it's like a really good people culture. And so the connectivity to like connect with people in their company and learn about different things, a lot of below the line things like logistics, supply chain, things like that is super helpful there. And then very recently, General Atlantic has been a new partner, and really talking about like long-term growth there. They've seen hundreds of companies grow at scale on an international scale that we admire. So they've been great so far, bringing their perspectives.
So you mentioned 100 million plus into the equipment and the facilities.
Yep.
Being vertically integrated, I can imagine, is a huge competitive advantage.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even sure if these other companies are or they aren't, but What type of pluses has that been for you?
Yeah, so non-alcoholic beer is a very contract manufactured category and a very imported category. So it really requires a lot of totally different brewing equipment than traditional beer. And so most people, rather than make those investments, outsource. And then there are a lot of companies in the category that are basically sales and marketing companies who outsource all the production. And so Athletic going the opposite way and deciding to do everything from ingredient selection to selling at the street level ourselves has been a really competitive vertical advantage.
Just from a control perspective, like you can do whatever you want, whenever you want.
Yeah, nimble, responding to supply and demand, being able to make whatever batch sizes we can. If demand surges or comes in lower than expected, we can adjust much quicker without paying contract brewing penalties. Or if we were in a contract brewing portfolio, we probably wouldn't be the top priority for that customer. So if their top priority was having a great year and needed all the capacity, we'd probably get pushed to the side. And then in running your own manufacturing, it can be great if you are doing it excellently. But if you're doing a sloppy job at running your buildings or aren't that great at it, it can actually be much, much more expensive and inefficient than outsourcing it. And so that's everything from quality to sourcing to everything. And so every one of our teammates has to be so good at their job for this to actually be an advantage, which they are though, luckily.
What I think is so ironic is conventional wisdom says, hey, before you buy into inventory for t-shirts, you want to drop ship t-shirts, you test it, see what works, and then you buy into the inventory. And I feel like with you guys, you probably should have sourced it out first before doing this, but you got lucky because no one wanted to do it for you. So you just said, fuck it, I'm gonna do it myself.
That was the business plan.
What happened,
the business plan was originally contract manufacturing before I met John. And eventually a lot of things routed us towards it was like, okay, this is actually a very proprietary process we have. We want to protect that, kind of like the Coca-Cola trade secret. So we want to make it all ourselves. Then on quality, this is actually a very difficult process and non-alcoholic beer is really sensitive. And we want to hold ourselves to quality standards that are just heads and shoulders above the industry. And so we could only do that in our own walls also. But going to a very specific time period in our history in COVID, and 2021 really had just as bad supply chain challenges as 2020. We had huge advantages in that our business wasn't super fragmented and we weren't going through 100 agencies, 100 different producers, things like that. It wasn't okay, the product's getting made here, yep, and then 3PL'd by this company and this company. It actually all happens right back there, And
if there's 100 pieces, just if one or two is MIA because of COVID, then you're out.
Yeah. And so if someone got sick, we would just have that team go take a paid break or paid week off or whatever, and we'd bring in the other shift, And so we got through COVID and moved really fast in that period. So I think two big advantages of COVID were we had a vertical business basically where we controlled so much of it. And then our e-commerce business. We were our first in beer e-commerce. And so those were two really lucky things where most corporations stood still in that time and we went vertical.
To put a bow on the investor stuff, how do you communicate to them? Are you giving them reports, monthly reports, quarterly reports? And what does that look like?
So one of my favorite things of this journey has been the gratitude of that team that supported us to build those first couple breweries and get going.
You like sending those numbers?
I loved, not all my updates have been great, but I love sending those updates and keeping them on for the journey. Some investors were really formative in those first conversations. They were in those angel investor meetings, they're this is as much about betting on you. I love the idea. I hope the product's good. But they're what I absolutely don't want is just not to hear about much and have it be out of business. Because a lot of people can be actually really helpful if you just share your challenges with them, which I do. And so for the first 4 years, I wrote monthly updates to the investor team.
Wow.
And so 48 monthly updates. And then I went to quarterly beyond that.
And what does a monthly update look like?
Yeah, it's KPIs, financials up top, progress, what's next, challenges, and then industry PR and headlines and stuff. But generally giving a well-rounded quick snapshot of where we're at as a business. And I can't tell you how many times people have picked at something in that and pulled on an incredibly helpful thread or made a great introduction, or like, I didn't realize you were looking to do that. I have all these connections. And so as our investor team has grown to over 120 people now, they've been some of our best supporters and connectors.
So let's talk about you for a second. You went from monthly to quarterly, because I would imagine going from 25 employees to 250, your role and responsibility as a CEO has changed dramatically. I did hear from Evan, though, before, that you're still getting in the nitty gritty and you're going to those Excel documents and do your own PowerPoint.
Oh yeah, for sure. I dropped in Evan in a meeting earlier today that I'd been building this like side model over the weekend.
Love it. So what would you say as a CEO, what would you say right now today is your core role?
So in many ways, I'm a master of nothing. Like, this is the idea.
Come on, man, don't say that. You're a world-class generalist.
Well, the idea of Athletic came from me in my life and was inspired by that. And I love being a generalist. John, as a co-founder, was like really technical, but the amount both of us have grown with the business has been enormous. And this learning journey has been the best interdisciplinary, most fun I've ever had. And like, and John has been right along there too, like the amount we've grown together. And he definitely has technical chops. I would say he's a real expert in so many things. But myself, I'm like more a generalist, and I'm here for support. So the early story of Athletic is Bill and John, but since then, the talented people we've had walk in our doors every day is unbelievable. Like our head of food safety and quality is a former regulator who, for some reason, decided to join our team. We had people join our brewery in really early days from breweries that were like 1 million times our size, walking into it's almost like that example there, someone going from one of the biggest breweries in the world and deciding to walk into our 10,000 square foot Stratford brewery is almost like Field of Dreams, where it's like, where like this person unbelievable, like totally unexplainably walks out of the cornfields into our brewery. But like these amazing teammates have done that time and time again. And as we've built a great group of people, it's attracted even better people every year. And so now when I try to like butt into conversations and stuff, I'm talking to such an expert usually that's like, Bill, I really appreciate you like trying to stay up to speed and learning, but like,
you're the optimizer. Find the problems and optimize.
But then there are things too where like John and I inherently have like tens of thousands of hours and energy and lessons learned in this business. So like me sitting in the background of a marketing meeting or a sales meeting or something can be incredibly helpful and be like, oh, I've actually seen that. This didn't work for that reason. Or this is the insight I had in 2022 on that. I'm not sure if it's still right, but like, this is the survey I ran at that time. So like that stuff, like there is a lot of ingrained knowledge. And I think also as the 30,000 foot guy, you can be incredibly helpful too on like helping people zoom out, or when people are like really good specialists, they often don't see the ripple into other departments or forward and backward in the business. So we can be helpful there. I would say though, like the reason it is so tough sometimes is there's a certain level of complexity, toxicity, anything where usually someone doesn't feel comfortable. Like we are big in decentralization, and I love it when people just make decisions and run with things. And like we learn lessons and get better, but we're much faster as a result. But there's a certain level of challenge of problem that needs more and more sign-offs. And so, you know, there's probably 5 to 8 things on any given day that rise to my desk and is like literally break my brain that they're so unique and weird and challenging and fun. And, you know, so I appreciate that too.
So you're clearly a hiring specialist. I think you are. What would you say are the top things that you look for when you're hiring? Is it a checklist with your core values and culture? How are you hiring people? Where are you finding them? Are you using recruiters? What's your strategy there?
Well, so really early in the company, we were trying to identify for like really good generalists, independent problem solvers, optimists, you know, people who could identify challenges and solve them, and not people who have tended to not do as well at Athletic are people who identify something and come back and be like, what's the next step? We also tend to have a lot of viewpoints on hiring processes. Like, you know, the old adage of like hiring slow is one of the truest things. And you tend to know when things aren't a fit also for like any number of reasons. No fault to people's often. Um, but going back to Blake Mycoskie, one thing he told me, he was like, continue to sit in on all the interview processes you can. The second you lose touch with that like entry level culture, like when people like being people's first touch point with the company is the second you're going to lose the whole culture. And I definitely took that to heart.
Obviously, you guys have had great success in the US. You've expanded elsewhere. UK and Canada are the two big ones from what I saw. How do you know where to go?
Very often listening to our customers in many ways, like you can feel the like heat and the pull to a new area. Canada and the US are relatively borderless. And so that has gone really well and not been that challenging. We have an incredible team of 6 people in Canada now. And very much brick by brick, like we've been so lucky to get people to lead these new areas and do it from a grassroots style with like very limited resources to start. And then every year we layer in more resources till you turn around 4 years later and there's a real business there and a real budget and a team and so that's a lot of fun. As you get farther and farther from home, it's definitely tougher. We're selling in the UK and a little bit in Paris and France now. And that's starting to go really well. And we went there because customers were asking for it. We've got this deal with Arsenal where we're the official non-alcoholic beer of Arsenal, which is one of the top Premier League teams. And that was because fans were emailing us saying like,
emailing you.
Yeah, want like literally to Bill at athleticbrewing.com. We want better beer at Emirates Stadium. And like, I was like, we should look into this. And we did, and it's been a great partnership. But the UK's been a receptive market so far. We're just like, building from grassroots up.
So what I'm curious about is traditionally, I always liken things back to apparel because that's the world that I come from. When you go internationally, you just hire a distributor. I'm curious with this, are you going distributor or is there new SG&A? Are you leveraging your internal resource? Are you using the back office? Like what does that go-to market look like when you go into other regions?
Yeah, a lot of, it depends, like everything, unfortunately. Like the answer is small business is like nothing's easy. And so it depends everywhere you go. Very often we can like stretch our like headquarters resources to scale into new spots. It's tough to get distributors far from home, but also distributors just make the deliveries. They don't actually make the sales. So like we actually need people on the ground to make the sales, call on big corporate chains like Tesco and Waitrose and all those. So it's a resources intensive battle, and like retailers want to feel the love. Like you got to be walking in the door. You got to make sure the beer looks good on the shelf. And we have made the mistake before of launching far from home with very low resources. And just because beer is going out the door, we assume it's getting to the right place and everything. So for example, in our UK business, probably like 18 months into the launch, it wasn't going as I would have hoped. And
what does that mean? Just not good sell-through?
Yeah, not great sell-through. And, earlier we talked about how when we launched in the US, people hadn't been shopping that shelf recently. It wasn't an exciting shelf, so why would they walk over to it? And I went out and I sampled in the US and built that business from the ground up. And like we actually drove people to those shelves. And we visited a lot of stores. Like our average salesperson in the US visits about 500 stores a quarter.
Wow.
And so when the UK business wasn't going as I hoped, I went to my wife. I was like, why should I really expect it to go any differently? Like I haven't been over there for any significant amount of time. And so we as a family went over for a month in 2023.
Shout out wifey again.
Yeah, and we had a blast with it. I visited a ton of stores, did a lot of sampling. We have a great group of teammates over there too, who are, I don't want to make this like the Bill show, but it was so helpful to see the shelf. And we're like, the beer may have gotten delivered to that store, but it's literally not on the shelf, or it's still in the cardboard case, which blocks the label or stuff. Like there's all this stuff where like, the beer gets delivered to the store, it sits in the back, it never makes it to the shelf. So your sell-through looks terrible, but no one in the store is actually putting it on the shelf.
And that's just brand education and just the small details.
Yeah. And so you have to visit the stores and build from the ground up. And so launching whether it's a new country or a new state, like it is like a slow going freight train, but like it takes 3 to 6 months for that word of mouth, people seeing on the shelf to really get going. And then whoosh, it grows like the word of mouth definitely pulls from there.
And by whoosh, you also probably mean supplemental marketing resources. Like you're going into the UK and then you invest in Arsenal.
Yeah. And like a little bit of success begets like a lot of more resources needed. And yeah, it's people, it's marketing, it's more distribution and like point of sale and everything like that. Yeah.
Let's go back to the people. I want to spanning, it's you, it's John, you bring in the assistant brewer. As someone that it's crazy to think that technically you're a first time entrepreneur. You are technically. What were those big hires that fundamentally changed your business? What were those inflection points?
Like literally everyone. I walk around these buildings and we have a lot of teammates who have I'm just doing the math quickly, but I think we have over 120 teammates who've been with us more than 4 years now.
Amazing.
But like a lot of those are 5, 6, 7. And when I go to like our West Coast brewery, we opened that brewery in March 2020, and we have a ton of continuity out there. And it's almost like there's almost like a second founding story out there. And it's so fun to talk to all those teammates who are on the ground when we bought this brewery 3,000 miles away, quadrupled it. And like now we bought the one across the street and we're scaling that up.
For quick context for people listening, when we walked in here, in the lobby on the screen was happy work anniversary. I saw 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, probably was like 10 different people on there.
Yeah. And so like, in so many ways, it's like the story of these amazing people walking around our building.
Great. Let's go to giving back. I didn't know what a B Corp was until I was on your website. I was a S Corp, C Corp, and LLC guy. I want to dive right into the two for trails. And let's get a masterclass on anything B Corp, because I have no idea what it was and I purposely didn't look any further.
Yeah. And so we actually weren't a B Corp when we launched. We were just doing these things. And so as John and I were thinking about what we wanted the business to be, like one of the earliest business ideas I had in athletic was like in building a long-term sustainable company, wanted to be like a good member of the communities we were doing business with and like build true community. Shout out to like, I came into this business with like mostly financial skills and like a lot of big ideas. A group of people who helped me bring that all to life in a way, like heard what I said and helped think about it was our creative and branding agency at Fairfolk out of Boston. And they've been with us for 7 years. We still work together every day. But John, one of the founders of the agency was like, you care so much about this business and this business plan has so many things. They're like, you've got to construct it so it's like an onion that people are peeling back layers. And even if they're 3 to 5 years into their athletic journey, are still discovering things they didn't know. And so that's kind of been our ethos, is to just generally be like good members of the business community, the communities we do business with. And like everything we say inside our walls is true outside our walls and vice versa. And it's like really easy to do business that way. And as we were thinking long-term, we wanted to make every teammate of Athletic a shareholder from day one. And then we provide 100% benefits to our employees. And then we had this big environmental program called Two for the Trails, where generally our goal is to enhance outdoor access for generations to come. Like very broad mandate to give us a lot of flexibility. But the goal was 2% of sales up to $2 million a year would go to just trail and park organizations, trail building, trail cleanups, helping people get outdoors. So it could be anything from like an urban bike park to like a backwoods trail system to Yosemite facelift, rebuilding rail trails.
And is that a personal passion of yours?
Yeah, I love the outdoors. I think like just getting outdoors and being active and like people moving a little every day is like a key part of health. And I think if we protect green spaces and people's ability to be active and get outdoors and be healthy, that'll be very world positive in 10, 20 years. And so this program, though, the way it compounds, we've only been in business 7 years. Originally, 2% of sales was very small. It was like $5,000. We wrote one check to the Appalachian Mountain Club in 2018, which was really fun and meaningful. But the next year, I think it was like $30,000. But now it's up to $2 million a year. And we're up to like $6.3 million donated over 6 years of business. And so as we look back in 10 or 20 years, this program is going to be like a hugely impactful environmental grant that just like reloads every year. Last year, I know we made 211 donations with that $2 million. This year, I'm sure it's about the same. So it's a really fun and impactful program. And kind of tying that back to the B Corp, we were just in business doing these things like being athletic, being good employers, being good members of the community. And I turned to John in 2020. I was like, I think we're doing everything a B Corp's supposed to do. Like, we should probably just apply. And so we applied to be a B Corp around like 2021.
So there's just like certain like numbers and metrics and benchmarks that you need to hit in hiring, in donating money to charity, and then you can be a B Corp?
Yeah, it's like a set of standards in doing business.
And how much did you lean on Blake from, is Tom's a B Corp?
I believe so. But he loved that part of our mission. I would say JJ Watt, another one of our investors, like loved the impact of our business. JJ Watt famously raised, I think it was like $65 million for the hurricane in Houston relief. But he is the most authentic, like nicest guy. Him and his wife are extremely charitable. Actually, the first time I met him, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me sharing this. He was actually like wrapping gifts for charity in his living room when I walked in the house. So he's like the nicest guy. And like, so I think a lot of our investors over the years have like really taken pride in athletics, like positive impact on the community and the world.
Amazing. I know you're deeply passionate from a giving back perspective on the entrepreneur side. I know you started making some investments I saw on LinkedIn. I'd love to know when you're evaluating investments. We were talking about a Christmas tree company off camera before. What do you look for in investments?
I probably should be more formulaic about how I do it and like what standards I uphold. But generally, I think it shakes out to the same place of like, am I proud to be involved in the companies I invest in? Do I want to support the founder? Do I believe in the founder? And like, it is so hard to be an entrepreneur and a founder and like have a successful business that like, I really look for those people who are like forces of nature and have really differentiated approaches. And like, I know angel investing is like a really low probability game. So I like really want to be proud in what I invest in and be confident that like the journey is going to be like fun and meaningful. And yeah.
Amazing. All right. So we're going to fire off some random questions and then we're going to get into the rapid fire. We're around the corner. What about the name? I feel like the name Athletic Brewing, like you go to a bar and you say, I want an athletic. It resonates with the psychology behind like doing something healthy as opposed to drinking beer. How'd you come up with the name?
Exactly like you said, that was a big part of the battle. Like when I had stopped drinking, I was at a bar looking for non-alcoholic beer and like good options. It was so hard to ask for and so stigmatized. And I really wanted a name that cut through a lot of that. And so it's impossible to have a word that'll be like perfect for everyone, but a huge percentage of the population considers themselves an athlete in some way. Like we like to say everybody's an athlete in their own way, whether that's like actually being like a sports athlete or being the best at Microsoft Excel or video games or whatever. So I wanted a word a lot of people could relate to, but that was like undeniably positive, crossed borders, was easy to understand. Like in a loud bar would be an easy bar call too. If there's a hard sound at the end of words, it's much easier to cut through noise too, supposedly. Generally just wanted to like blow away the stigmas of the category though and make it a positive aspirational name.
All right, it's lightning round time. I'm going to fire away a bunch of randoms.
Awesome.
Let's start. Yeah, take a little drink first.
I'll try not to be so windy in my answers.
No, you could be windy. Best hike in the United States?
Oh, wow. I'd say my most memorable hikes I did in back-to-back years with my brother. It was the Presidential Traverse and the Pemi Loop in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. They're like really technical. One of them's like 22 miles, one's 14 mile, or I think the Pemi Loop was a 33-mile day, 14 hours. So
this is running or biking? Running?
Ran where we could. It's like so technical and so many rocks and stuff that there aren't many free steps. I also love the mountains of Colorado too. There's a lot of like much more wide open 14,000 foot hikes you can do.
What's a trail that you guys renovated? Why don't you give one a shout out?
Interesting. A really cool story, and one of my all-time favorite stories of this program was, I think in 2019, The main Hudson Trails program was not going to open for the summer. They didn't have enough funding. They had like a $50,000 shortfall. And we said we would fund the first and last $10,000 if they could get there. And this program gets tens of thousands of kids out into the woods every summer on this like long Hudson Trails system. And they hit that goal with a big portion of it coming from athletic. And so that was like the most fulfilling one in my eyes because we got tens of thousands of kids outdoors.
Legendary. Favorite flavor of Athletic?
Run Wild. It's like our classic IPA, and it just goes well with so many foods. Whatever style of beer people like, on our website, athleticbrewing.com, we do launch about 50 different beers a year. So like at any time, there's like exciting limited releases going on there.
What is John Walker's superpower?
Wow. A lot. And it might be learning, because it's turned out that like anything I've ever put on his radar, like 2 to 4 weeks later, he comes back and seems to have like a total mastery of. And so whether like he came in with a brewing background and like very technical welding and things like that. But as we like talked about financial concepts over time or fundraising concepts or anything, like he would ask me a lot of follow-up questions on things, and all of a sudden months later would just have mastery of all these concepts. So
that might be the greatest surprise that you got out of all this, thinking that he was just the product guy and now he's bringing you like business acumen. And it seems like ops, if he's thinking in that framework of how to like a problem solver.
yeah, no, incredible on the culture side, on the hiring side, as a collaborator. He's good at the marketing side. And so, yeah, really just as a friend, like someone I can drop all sorts of random ideas on that we talk about.
Shout out Uncle John. How many athletics a week? Don't lie.
I'm probably like 20 to 26, I would say. I'm like 3 a day, generally. Usually like the afternoon workday or lunch beer. The drive home from work beer is like a really sneaky, awesome beer. I have a 45-minute commute. So the drive home from work beer is one of my favorites. The dinner beer, like relaxing.
Really quick, I don't know if this should stay in the final cut or not, but like if you're drinking this while driving, can something happen there?
Depends on the state. There are like 6 states where athletic is considered alcohol, but in most states, non-alcoholic beer is not regulated as alcohol and fine to drink and drive. But there's certain states like Michigan, Georgia, Mississippi, Idaho, and a couple others where there's either an age or it's classified as alcohol. So definitely look at your local regulations before enjoying that awesome commuter beer. And then my last one is, after I put my son to bed, and I usually like these days, like my early entrepreneurial journey schedule is much different than now. I still work a similar amount of days, but like I tend to have like really good family blocks mixed in. And then I'll start work again like 7:30 to 10 at night or 11 at night, or depending on what I've going on, 4 a.m. But like having a beer after everything is quieted down and I just dive into projects is like, it's so relaxing too. Because like with alcoholic beer in my old career, if I had an alcoholic drink,
You're going to pay for it in the morning.
and the brain stops to work, you like realize you're not doing your best work and you eventually shut it down. Where like a lot of nights at 11 o'clock, if I had a button for 6 more hours, I'd be like pressing that button.
Single hardest part about being a CEO?
I tend to like anything John and I have ever come across on like the business side or like technical challenges or financial challenges hasn't been that stressful. Like we can work through anything. I love the book, The Obstacles the Way, and like just that mindset. But like the people stuff, like I care about our team and our people so much. And like, when people do stupid things or short-sighted things or, it can be, the people is like what weighs on me for like weeks and months, where like any acute business challenge is in and out of my head in six hours.
The biggest mistake you've made? We asked the tough questions here.
It's like such a cop out, but I'm like honestly grateful for my mistakes, because like this is a learning journey, and like every mistake we've made, we've learned from. I think the biggest mistake would be if we ever like stopped learning from those mistakes. I do wish I had, like, we've always had decent idea of our unit economics, but like I would say our financial discipline wasn't necessarily where it could have been early. Like we chose to go really fast and invest out in front of the category and everything. It took us bringing in an exceptional CEO 3 years into our like actual commercial journey. So he's been with us almost 4 years now. But like that was a great turn to have an incredible partner on the financial side who wasn't just a no person, wasn't just clamping down the growth, but like really helped us get on top of our financial picture.
I would say the same thing with me. I'm on an 8-year journey, and looking back the first like 5 years and not even seeing, marketing and COGS as a percent of revenue. I didn't even look at my core inputs as a percent of revenue until it might even be year 6. It's actually embarrassing, to be completely frank with you.
Yeah. And as I was saying before, there's an enormous difference between like a well-functioning operating model. And like you may think on paper, this is theoretically how your business is running and should be run. But like there's a big difference in like monthly closing process and like closing out actuals and different things. And having a great CFO and controller has been so key.
Last question before the last segment. Best piece of advice someone has given you?
I do think, some of my best advisors have been really good at like extending my line of thinking, like getting out of the 6 inches in front of my face and saying, what do you want? Like, what does that decision in 5 years look like? What does that decision in 10 years look like? What do you want the path to be to get from here to there? Forget the daily distractions. I think that sort of big picture thinking is like, it's so rare when someone flies in with a piece of advice and is like, do this now. Like the best advice is just people who make you really think and look at things through a different frame, I think.
A longer term lens.
Yeah, very often. Yeah.
Favorite book or podcast and why?
So many. I tend to follow guests and podcasts but I love the Founders podcast.
My favorite podcast.
About like, I can't get enough of that. The stories, David's energy. I like the All In podcast for my current events. I like Rich Roll's, very inspirational. Patrick Shaughnessy, Invest Like the Best for financial. There's honestly so many I listen to though, like guest dependent. There's a whole nother range like Lex Fridman, Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss. And then there's a whole nother group for health, like Peter Attia and Andrew Huberman and stuff. So I wish there were more hours in the day for the podcast. I love my commute for that reason. I also read a ton. I try to read every day. I once heard that like 20 minutes a night of reading adds up to 30 books a year or something like that. So I'm generally obsessed with reading biographies as mostly what I try to read.
I never read biographies until I discovered Founders about a year ago. The first episode I listened to was Ted Turner. I don't know if you listened to that episode. This guy is a savant from another planet. He's done a million things. And then I bought the book and read the book, and I've been hooked on Founders ever since.
It's amazing. Yeah.
For people listening, it's a guy that's dedicated his whole entire life to reading multiple times biographies of Rockefeller, Carnegie, Bezos, and it's just him talking by himself. And I love doing those really, really slow and then saying, how can I use this in my business? I think that's probably my favorite podcast.
How many of those have you listened to?
At this point, 25.
Yeah, I didn't find it till 2 years ago, but I'm like 200 episodes in, which I guess maths out.
I got rookie numbers.
Which maths out to, 2 a week or something like that. But
last question. An entrepreneur or a brand that you want to give flowers to and why? It could be anybody.
Wow.
This is a big shout out here, Bill.
Yeah.
You could take 16 seconds. We can cut right now.
I'd say 2 things in my like kind of everyday stack. Momentous supplements. I like trust the team there and their sourcing. So like a lot of my daily nutritional stack from protein powder to everything is momentous.
Shout out the CEO or founder. What's his name?
Jeff Byers, like incredible founder, former NFL player, just like a force of nature. And then someone I played high school football with founded Roan, the clothing company, Nate Checketts.
Oh, wow.
We didn't know each other at that point and didn't know each other for probably 15 years after that. We did play sports direct head to head on rival teams through our high school career. But like, I like became friendly with him, and like Rowan is probably like half the clothes I wear. It's like not only incredible gear, but incredible culture as a company. So it's one of those companies like you find out a little about and want to learn more about, and generally great people and great stuff.
You're going to generally laugh when I tell you that we have, I think it's 171 target guests, and we have it by state. And in Connecticut, we have Check-its in you. That's
Awesome.
so funny that you say that.
He's a great person. Like he's, yeah, I love supporting his company.
You had an amazing time. I want to say thank you for the hospitality. It's a beautiful, beautiful brewery. Chris gave us a nice tour. I'm generally excited to see what happens with you guys. I think the sky's the limit. Something that really blew my mind, it's a stat that we didn't talk about, is when you had that idea, it was 0.3% of the market. It's now 1.5%. But in certain channels I read, it's up to 10%. And to think that it's not going to blow through that, let's end with that. How big do you think Athletic can be?
Well, like you were saying, that first like 2% has been pushing a very large boulder from a standstill, and it's been incredibly difficult. But now all of a sudden, it feels like the water's warm, and we're on this, it feels like there's this tidal wave just offshore still. And so 0 to 2%, incredibly difficult. But like some of those retailers and channels that bought into us the earliest, Whole Foods was a big part of our discovery story. In natural channel grocery nationally, non-alcoholic beer is already more than 10% of all beer sales. In certain grocers, non-alcoholic beer is 15% of all beer. And so that would extrapolate to like $15 billion at retail. But in my head, like I see it going, I think the 2 to 10% of beer is going to be incredibly fast. 20% is going to be an easy one, I think. And then I don't want to lose all credibility and say how far beyond that I think it's going to go, but I do think like it just makes sense with people are not drinking alcohol 99% of the time they're awake. Why wouldn't great non-alcoholic beverages be more than 50% of the pie over time? And so I think people are still sleeping on, most people think non-alcoholic beer is going to 3 to 5% of beer. And in our heads, we think it's going 10%, 10 times that.
Amazing time, man. Where can they find you? LinkedIn, Instagram, social, where can they find you?
Yeah, athleticbrewing.com, LinkedIn, anything. So yeah, social media. We've got all of our latest and greatest on mainly Instagram and athleticbrewing.com. Thank you.
Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thank you for coming. This was a blast. Cheers.